Matt Holbrook from the MEMIC Group, and I've been asked today to take you through a little bit of what my company just went through to try to modernize its data architecture. Start with the MEMIC Group. We're a monoline workers' comp insurer that's based in Portland, Maine. We're incorporated in 1993, so we're at our 30th anniversary this year. It was formed essentially by the Maine legislature. It was chartered after the collapse of the workers' comp insurance market in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's actually now been a model for other states in terms of trying to reorganize their workers' comp insurance environments. We have three companies, underwriting companies: Maine Employers Mutual Insurance Company, that's the mothership, the original version. And then we have two subsidiaries, both based in Manchester, New Hampshire, MEMIC Indemnity Company and MEMIC Casualty Company. We are licensed in 47 jurisdictions. Those are all 47 competitive jurisdictions. There are 4 states that are monopolistic, but our primary business is along the East Coast. We do a fair amount of coverage here in Massachusetts. Our written premium back in 2021, and these figures I'm giving from our website, so I'm not giving away any secrets, was $389 million. We covered about 22,000 policyholders with about 300,000 workers, and we have over 450 employees. Also, we have satellite offices as well as in Portland and Manchester, New Hampshire. We also have in West Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, Weehawken, New Jersey, Glastonbury, Connecticut, Albany, New York, Tampa, Florida, and Tysons Corner, Virginia. One thing about MEMIC, or the MEMIC Group, was we once were featured in the Wall Street Journal because of our innovative use of moose hunt licenses, which are given out in the fall of every year. And we were able to take that data and compare it to our injured worker data. And therefore, we've had, in cases where there was an injured worker who may have been on restrictions, which should prevent that person from working with a 1,200-pound animal, we could send SIU people out to investigate. And in one case, one of our SIU people was out there when one of these injured workers bagged a moose, asked him to take a picture, which he did. And that picture actually ended up on the Wall Street Journal. And that person, I assume, is may actually be in prison for what he did. But that's a little bit about what we've been able to do with data. Here's something about myself. I'm at MEMIC. I'm the Director of Enterprise Data Analytics and Architecture. So I oversee data analytics and enterprise data management. I've been with MEMIC for 26 plus years. 34 years in information technology, and prior to MEMIC, I worked in the retail industry. Was for a company called May Department Stores, which used to, for a period of time, own Filene's, which some of you may be familiar with in this area. Talk about the origins of the journey that we took. So I stepped into the current role I'm in early 2019, and it was in a response to senior leadership was finding, what we were finding was that our different business areas were trying to build up analytics staff to do, they were all pulling down Power BI, they were starting to work with data, and then reports were being presented to senior management, and those reports had issues, or they were wrong, there were questions about them, and they needed somebody in the middle to help make that data clearer, more understanding, and hence, given my experience I was before that in application development, I know a lot about our data, I was brought into that role. And one of the things I decided early on was to conduct a research project in terms of what's out there for analytics platforms. People were using Power BI. I didn't know if that was the best choice for us at that point. So I wanted to see what was out there, so we engaged a local IT consulting firm who happened to be a tenant in one of the buildings we own for tax reasons. They went about interviewing business users, and then we began to look at a lot of the analytics products that were out there. But at the same time, we started looking at also data management solutions. And one of the key learnings for me that came out of this project was that we really needed a better data management solution rather than looking at for an analytics solution. And in particular, it was the first time I started hearing about this concept of data virtualization. So from that, we pivoted to we stopped looking for an analytics platform and started looking for data management solution. There were some other considerations going on too. We have disparate data sources probably just like everybody else does. And these need to really be brought together in order to meet business needs. We've got data on an IBM AS400. We've got data in SQL Server databases. There's a need to get at external data that's available out there. We also were looking for better ways of integrating business applications. A lot of the integrations were these point-to-point app-specific integrations. We wanted to try to get away from that. As well, we had decided it was time to start replacing our core business systems, which had been with us for at least 25 years or so, based on legacy technology. So either at the time we were starting this project, we were already, one of those projects was in flight and another one was being started up. And then, as I said, the business areas were adding analytics staff who would need better capabilities around data, better understanding around data. You know, I've seen the numbers. They talk about that it takes a data analyst or a BI analyst, 80% of their time is spent trying to wrangle the data. We were also starting to engage with AI vendors around machine learning initiatives. Specifically, we had a claim benchmarking initiative going on with one vendor, and we had a policy quote scoring initiative with another one. And then there's a general desire, at least it's talk, or maybe a desire that the company wants to become more data-driven in what it does, that less basing decisions on gut or experience and more of bringing data into those. So, given that, we thought it made sense to seek a data integration solution. I use that term because that's a Gartner term. I worked with the Gartner Magic Quadrant and their critical capabilities research, and there they have sort of a wide set of products that all have different capabilities, and the capabilities are changing as these vendors are trying to garner more of the market. So we had these requirements, which is what we presented to the vendors that we were asking about. We wanted the ability to access different data sources as if they would reside in the same database. And we wanted to improve the accessibility of data for internal as well as external applications. Reduce the amount of data transformation and preparation required on the part of data analysts and BI analysts, and also provide those people with a business-friendly semantic layer for all those data sources. Improve the data quality, and then keep the data replication to a minimum and try as much as possible to leave data where it resides, and then to improve the ability for us to set the security on specific data objects, whether it's at table level, row, column level. And now not all of those requirements are necessarily going to be fulfilled, but most of them have been. So in February of 2021, we kicked off the project to acquire this integration solution. I recruited 15 colleagues of mine from the IT department, or 13 from the IT department, a couple from outside of the IT department. Within the IT department it was people from infrastructure, from my own team in data and analytics, information security, application development, quality assurance, and business analysis people, as well as a couple of business intelligence analysts from the business areas. And we constructed an RFI based on Gartner's RFP for data integration solutions. And we sent that out to 9 vendors. And when the vendors sent those back and the team scored those, whoever were the top 5, we decided to then go through a series of demos and deep dives with them. And that was based on, again, a script that we provided to them, that what we were expecting to see. And then we scored that. And then once those demos and deep dives were scored, we came up with 2 vendors who would go through a proof of concept with us. Again, we gave them a specific script as to what we wanted to see in that proof of concept. It went for approximately 2 weeks for each vendor. And then the vendor that was better at meeting the POC was the one that was selected. And then in October of 2021, a contract was signed. And that vendor is Denodo, was the vendor that we went with. So I think that's all for my presentation. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer anything.
Any questions from the audience? I have a lot, so that's fine.
Thank you, John. The last point that you made in terms of the selection process, I was wondering if you could detail that out a little bit more for us. In other words, were there steps that you took vendors through, initial step, for example, or a pilot step, or a proof of concept step, et cetera? So as a vendor myself, having some insight and knowledge of that would be helpful. Thank you.
Are you talking about the last 2 vendors that we were?
Yes, the process.
Yeah, so what we did it as I guess you could call it a proof of concept or a trial evaluation. So we would load the software in our environment. We had developed a specific task that we wanted to perform, and gave that document so that the vendors knew what we were expecting to be able to do. And then we ourselves, my team essentially went through that proof of concept and did those tasks. And then we evaluated those tasks. We didn't necessarily score them, 1 to 5 or anything like that, but we determined whether the vendor was succeeding or failing at meeting what we thought the requirement was for that particular task.
Yeah, there's definitely questions around the process, which is interesting. So that took you about 8 months to go from RFI to contract, right?
Yeah, and part of the problem is that, as I mentioned, we were in the midst of a core business system replacement project, and I've been here for 26 years, so I guess I know a thing or two about a thing or two at MEMIC, so I was pulled into a lot of that to talk about that. But it's also, you find that everything goes slower. The more people that are involved, everything goes slower. But I think it ultimately was at a good pace. And key thing I wanted to make sure is in my department, there's a lot of silos, infrastructure versus security versus app dev. Yep. I wanted to make sure I got buy-in from all those different groups within the department, so that we didn't just come to them and say, hey, look what we got, put it into production for us. That they were also part of that evaluation process.
Right. So about 1.5 years now you're in since contract signed. So I mean, how's the rollout, the building of the views, the integration views?
So right now, we've got Denodo in four separate environments, from development, QA, UAT through production. One of the first things we did with it is we did what I was calling internally, we're calling it Denodo 1.0. So we have a set of applications that were built on a low-code platform, and so at the time we had allowed the vendors professional services had been building a lot of these applications, and we had made the mistake of allowing them to also source the data. And so what we use Denodo to do is to sort of mimic where that data was coming from, mimic it so it looked like, structurally, it looked like the data that they were reading, but it was either coming from a different source, or it may have been coming from the same source, because what we're trying to do is Denodo 2.0 is what we're calling is to move to a common data model within Denodo, so that we can present domains that represent our key business concepts, like policies and claims. And that's the data that you use to you do your integrations or to do your data analysis, et cetera.
So the 1.0 is kind of porting the existing applications to access through Denodo.
And give us a chance to work with Denodo.
Yep, that's a great start with your as-is kind of current state. And then the second one is going to be more about new common models and things like that. So what's interesting with this approach, because I live and breathe the architecture side of things too, is that you're not actually extracting data and then kind of putting it into a new data warehouse repository database, but you're accessing from the data in place, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
So two questions that I see often on that approach. So one, do you see an increased kind of workload on the operational systems that's still manageable and okay? Because they had their previous job plus this new kind of Denodo user workload. I mean, are you seeing that yet? Or?
We have not seen that yet.
Okay.
We are having some issues as we've moved these low-code applications to point at Denodo. We have seen some issues that we're trying to find out, is it the low-code platform, is it Denodo, is it something in between? So we're still working that out. But we haven't really seen any degradation of
right.
performance
Operational systems.
And we do have now a new claims management system that went in 2020, and part of the work we did for Denodo 1.0 was to point these applications to that claims management system, as opposed to the old system that still resides on our AS400.
So do you find that the operational systems data models, if you will, are easy to work with, and you're going to transform them in Denodo, but they're, sometimes they're so cryptic and bizarre, being vendor solutions, that they're hard to work with. I mean, is that a challenge in any way?
The claims management system is fairly easy to work with from a model, and given that we've only been with it for a couple of years. Our AS400 data, though, is a challenge, because AS400 doesn't allow you to have more than 10 characters generally in what they call physical files, which are equivalent of tables in SQL. So that's been more of a challenge on that, although not for me, because I've lived and breathed it for 26 years.
Right.
But for some of our people, and that's one of the advantages of Denodo, is that we can make that data, we can give it column names that are much more user-friendly and self-documenting.
Right. And then I guess the last question is that when you're going through Denodo to operational systems directly, the other thing is that you're looking at the current state of data and records, whereas you're not really capturing some of the changes or the CDCs. I mean, was there anything in your requirements that would call out for, we need to see all the different stages of a claim or something like that? Because usually operational systems are update status type stuff.
When we brought the claims management system, we actually have an A and B database that are for high availability.
Okay. Yep.
So we point at the B, which is replicated, I think every couple of minutes it gets replicated. Well, we're pointing at the B, so we're not necessarily hitting the actual production database.
Okay.
But which certainly helps. On the AS400 side, that's one of the things that we haven't seen any real problems with joining that data from a performance standpoint.
Yeah. So, and then as you move to your 2.0, are you prioritizing certain domains or areas?
Policy and claims, which is
First,
essentially what we do. Policy, I always like to say insurance. It's you give us money and we hope you don't want it back. But but it's actually, we make a promise, right?
Right,
That's what the
policies.
policy is. And the claim is the fulfillment of
Yep.
of the promise. And that also is key to our profit and loss, is
Right.
the policy's the revenue and the claims are most of
Yeah.
our costs.
And I saw that you mentioned on your slide that you had kind of these ML use cases as
Yeah.
one of that. Would that be kind of in the claim fraud kind of space or something more else?
One that we're doing is we work with a company called Clara Analytics. They're
Yeah.
out on the West Coast, and they've created a couple of modules, one around benchmarking and almost like load balancing for claim inventory.
Yep.
It kind of helps you to make sure that the more experienced adjusters have, and the less experienced adjusters have appropriate workloads. The other thing is we have a provider scoring based on what they do for how well their outcomes are in terms of their medical treatment. And then on the other side, we have on the underwriting side, we have a relationship with a company called Gradient AI that's created a way for us to score quotes. So we submit the quotes to them, they use that data, and they use federated data to come up with what they think the predicted losses are going to be, from which we can then
Right.
create a target premium and to see, how well we're pricing that piece of business.
No, great, great. Any other questions? All right. Oh, yes. Here we go. I can give you this so everybody can hear you.
So when you have two different data sources that someone's putting, so I assume all the reporting tools are on top of that. And if they want to put the two sources together, how do you kind of protect it so that they're not, asking really bad questions, or they're not, getting bad answers? How do you know what I mean? How does it do the joins?
Yeah, to be honest, we haven't really run into that yet.
Okay.
But that is a conversation that we're going to be having more and more about as we go forward. But yeah, that is something, that's the shoe I'm waiting to drop, the other shoe that I'm waiting to drop in this case. But so far, things have been going very well. But that's one of the things now is we have to look at performance tuning. And the Denodo folks have been, we have weekly meetings with them, and we talk about things, and they're working with us. We've got a set of second quarter goals that we want to do in terms of what the, so we're working on high availability so that the Denodo box, it will be available regardless of what happens. We've also established a monitoring routine, and we've got a database so we can now start looking at data to see if there's any anomalies happening in terms of.
Does it also keep track of who's consuming your data?
Yes, yes, it does.
Yeah,
But
it has-
the thing is, you got to make sure that what we're working on is identifying. Right now, we really only have one consumer. That's this low-code platform. We are going to work on establishing, so anyone coming in is going to have a name that will be recorded in the monitoring data, so we'll know who it actually is that's running that query.
Yeah. It's one of the kind of best practices, I think, and I work with Denodo forever, is to have the push-down security models so that, the user authentication happens at the lowest database level. So on those joins, you can't return, you get a partial or incorrect working kind of view. So you can do security at different levels in the abstracted. You can do masking for sure at that level as well.
We have that issue. We've got some policies that we actually self-insure ourselves. Those are policies and claims that we don't want generally people to have access to, so we have to work on how do we secure those, which Denodo's got a lot of capabilities around making sure that we can either mask those or prevent people from looking at the details within there.
Yeah.
You have non-prod environments too.
Yep. So there's 4 environments: Dev, QA, UAT, and Prod, and those are all pointed at different sets of different sets of data sources that are at those same environment levels.
Yeah. And a lot of organizations use version control to kind of store and post those DDLs across environments that I've seen. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and stop for lunch. It's 12:45, and the tracks are both going to start back up at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks.